Hi everybody, and welcome back to part 2 of recovery. As we talked about in part 1, every technique works, they all have value. What's most important is choose the one you have access to, can tolerate, and use consistently. Now the next thing is, how do I know if that recovery is working, and how do I monitor that? Am I recovered? Those are the bigger questions that come up now. In monitoring recovery, there's generally 2 processes we use. It's like research. We get objective data and we get subjective data. Objective data means we're kind of measuring something to see what state of readiness you are. Subjective data is generally questionnaires like the RESCUE, which has got like 70 or 80 questions in it to get a full state on your mental, physical, emotional value at that point in time. Objective data can get pretty complex too. We've got things like ballistic measurement systems, we've got force plate, Valve, and all these other great tools that are out there that measure some aspect of force production, speed, power, to see what your readiness for training is. You've got nervous system activity, things like the megawave system, again, another really good system that gives a lot of good information. Heart rate function is another big thing we look at, heart rate variability. You've got direct measures of that like ECG, EKG, which are a bit invasive. And then of course you've got that now being worked from a subjective or predictive standpoint on your smart device and your phone. And then blood monitoring, super invasive. You can go in and look at hormones, lactic acid, glucose, a bunch of markers that might tell you something about the person's state. This is an important point before you go down the route of trying to monitor, figure out how to monitor recovery. A person or athlete's feeling or perceptions of how recovered they are is as important as whatever physical sign they may show you. So if we get a measure in a vertical jump height and that tells you they're at X percentage of their max vertical, they're ready or not for training, it's actually a good value to have, but the way that person feels about themselves at that moment is as important, maybe more important than what that number is showing. And ultimately what we're learning is we're not dealing with robots, we're dealing with people. And there needs to be a holistic understanding of what recovery is. Hey, it's World Cup time, right? There was a football research study done in the last year looking at recovery tech on professional footballers, and they found the same thing. Recovery had a general benefit. There wasn't really a big difference between some of the modalities that they used, but what was fascinating was the athlete's perception of recovery was the thing that stood out most from the researchers' analysis of the data. And that's interesting, again, because we can't separate how a person's feeling and thinking about things from how they physically are showing those things. Why this really relates to the whole process of recovery, because as you get more experience in your field, you can start out learning about recovery measurement techniques and you start to apply them with your athletes or clients that you're working with. But again, with experience, you start to notice that most people can actually handle the training we give them. What's affecting recovery is often the intangibles, and there's the big 4 outside of training that really affect how a person is recovering, not just from training, but life. The big 4, work, relationship, school, money. Without a doubt for me, in the 3.5 decades of doing this, I'd say at least 70-80% of the recovery issues I have with an athlete or a person or we've had in a program come more from that rather than what we were doing in the program. We're in the mental health day, especially after the post-pandemic. We never had those conversations. Nobody talked about mental health in the sports field even 10, 20, 30 years ago. The best way to monitor recovery, just like I talked to you about recovery technique, the best one is the one that's simple and the one you actually use. Monitoring recovery has to be simple. It has to be easy. It has to be personal, in case you're working with a team and you've got a multiple individual. It has to be daily. It has to be holistic, and most importantly, this is critical to understand, it has to catch early signs of problems. One of the key points, if you get a takeaway from today, is just remember that the early signs of fatigue or burnout are generally not physical. They are emotional and psychological. By the time you're seeing long-term physical change, and if you know anything about Hanselier's adaptation syndrome, you'll understand this. And if you've worked through that through multiple Olympic or national cycles, you'll have seen that you start to see the signs of burnout long before anything physically shows up. And now, if you're not a high-level person, listen to this, you don't have a lot of exposure to sports science, I'll make an example for you in daily life. You're starting to feel a little burnt out at work. Family's a little bit of stress, you're doing your little bit of exercise. Last couple of weeks you look back And you can start to feel, yeah, I wasn't getting good sleep, wasn't eating well, really a bit stressed out. A few weeks of that go by, and what do you feel? Boom. All of a sudden, you start getting a tickle in the back of your throat. You start sniffling, you start noticing, oh man, I'm getting sick. But if we actually analyze that cold started maybe a month ago. Your immune system function was breaking down over time. Your body finally said, enough's enough, I'm gonna get sick. If you're not gonna rest, I'm gonna force you to rest. And the physical signs show up. It's no different for an athlete. So remember, we need ways to be able to see what's going on as a holistic snapshot of a person early, so that we can find out and begin dialogue and conversation on these things early. Because the time you see physical signs, it's too late. And you know it. The moment you get that tickle in your throat, you know, I'm gonna get sick. And you try and do everything. You vitamin C, you go to bed early that night, doesn't matter. The next day you wake up and you've got a cold. You can't reverse that. You kind of got to slide through the down period and then start recovering. Now, what I want to present to you today is something I'm kind of excited about. It's a tool that I developed. It's called the Rating of Perceived Recovery. Yeah, of course, the board guys stole my idea. No, I'm kidding. I stole theirs. I love the RPE scale and the board scale because it's simple. It's a great way to monitor how somebody's responding to activity. Are you a 1 or are you a 10? It's a really clean and easy way to pick up a snapshot of what a person's experienced. And I started to realize with recovery, that's what we kind of needed. I wanted to ask, instead of asking how hard did we work, I wanted to say, how much are you recovered? How are you feeling before we start? And ultimately, I realized that this scale, it's a communication tool. It helps us see early signs in a non-invasive way. It's really easy to use. And it opens a dialogue that you can use consistently, because it also recognizes everybody has a bad day. But it's not normal to have bad days, bad weeks, and bad months. Those are signs of problems. Rating of Perceived Recovery, it's an evolution of the board scale. And what I did was use a similar mindset. What I started to see is that people who reported high RPEs from training also tended to tell me later they didn't feel recovered at the start of it. So I realized there was connections happening here. And that's when I started exploring with, well, rather than ask them after training how hard they worked, let's ask them before training how ready they were for that training. And once I started asking for those numbers, I started to see some really interesting things. And this comes down to the timing of using the scale. And this is a really critical point because we use it very differently from an RPE. It's got 3 kind of codes. We look at a percentage code, we look at a color code, and we look at a text code. The percentage code, it's a simple number that gives you an actual measurement that can be tracked. The color makes it easy to understand, and the text makes it personal because you can read the text line and say, that's how I feel, or yeah, that's what I'm experiencing. That internal dialogue you have in your conversation about how do I feel. Now for the guidelines, there's a couple of guidelines here that really make it simple, I think. Number 1, you got to trust your instincts. When you ask somebody, how are you feeling? As a percentage, how recovered did you feel this morning when you woke up for work or training or whatever you woke up to? As a 0 to 100%, what recovery percentage did you feel? Boom, the answer already went to your head. You immediately thought of a number, and that's the right number. And what's dangerous is when we have a gut instinct to something, unfortunately, we've learned to not trust them. And so the second thing we do after our gut instinct response is we analyze the gut instinct response from a sort of moral, ethical, community judgment. We think, oh my God, I was at 30%, but I can't tell that to coach, or I can't tell anybody that because then I'm not a good person. You know, I'm lazy, or there's something wrong with me. You have to get past that. And so when they do use the scale, you want to get their first number. Don't let them sit for 5 minutes thinking about it. Get them used to just blurting out a number. Some will, some won't, but record that first number. It's really important you get that. The next thing you have to think about is there's 3 critical times a day because we're looking for patterns here that we use the scale in. First and foremost, how recovered do you feel when you wake up? Within 5 minutes of waking up, record your score. Don't think about it, just record your score. The second time we take it in that day, prior to starting training. When you arrive at the training hall, when you arrive at the gym, when you get ready to sit down on your mat at home, before you even lay the mat out or go get it, when you say, now is training time, how do I feel before I go in the process of getting ready for training? Before your warm up, putting on your shoes, getting out your kit, how recovered do you feel? And the third point to use it then is after completion of the warm-up. And these three are very telling signs, and they're very important points, because this process, as I've seen over the years of using it, it's different for everybody, but there's a pattern that shows up that's normal and one that's abnormal. Looking at the scale, I think you can figure out in general what are good patterns and bad patterns. Generally, anything under 30%, yeah, that's not a good sign. If you're less than 30% recovered as a perceived rate of recovery, you're basically saying, I'm not ready for much. Now, if it's a single incident, you investigate it. If it's happening multiple times, you need to dig deeper. If you're looking at that 30 to 60% range, again, that's a trend. It doesn't mean they can't train, but it does mean something's going on. And here's the most interesting thing when I started using the scale a lot is the best athletes and the best training we had was always around 70 to 80%. And I realized that's actually the normal. It's kind of like life, right? Get 80% of it right. Get your attendance at 80%. Be consistent 80% of the time. And be recovered at 80%. It's rare somebody comes in, especially if you've been doing anything for a long time in sport, and comes and said, I'm 100% today. I'm 100% morning, then pre-workout, then at workout time. And so make the target about 70 to 80%. Don't expect 90s and 100s, not even pre-competition. Okay, it doesn't really work like that. And once you start to use it, you'll understand if they're in that range consistently, this is a person who's ready. Now, the last part, and this is kind of the important part, is understanding a little bit about patterns. As you use a tool like the RPR, and I really hope you do, it's got a lot of value, is you're going to find your own patterns for people. What I would call the normal or balanced pattern, from my experience anyway. In the morning, people are generally between 50 to 70%. Nobody wakes up ready for everything. You're tired, you're a little bit sore, and you're not ready into the day, and it's kind of normal. Pre-warm-up, whatever it is, you should see a little better improvement. That's why I said 60 to 80% or 60% plus. But by the time you finish your warm-up, and coaches, you would know this very well, person shows up, hey guys, you ready for training? No, coach, I want to go back to bed. Then 20 minutes later, they're warmed up, they're ready to go. You should see that same pattern, boom, 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 as a regular, balanced sort of process to being prepared for something difficult to come. Where it starts to fall apart is when you look at the abnormal or imbalanced level. In the morning, anybody who says they're below 50%, they're dealing with something. Whether it's an acute reaction, one time they had a bad sleep, if they just turn around and said, yeah, I had a really bad sleep last night, I'm okay. Good. That's not a pattern. That was an issue. But you see that 2, 3, 4 days in a row, something's going on. Pre-warm-up, this is a really interesting one. Prior, people can drop from how they felt in the morning to just before training. And that's a critical sign of something's not right. Because even the day's not waking them up. It doesn't mean they're clinically depressed. It doesn't mean they can't do anything. But it means there's an issue and a dialogue that needs to be happening. And maybe you have to adjust their training. Post warm-up, anybody who's below 70%, they're sending a message. Yeah, I'm still not recovered. I didn't wake up well. I didn't feel good when I got here. And after warm-up, I still don't feel good. And it's like that tomorrow. Or I had 3 days like that last week and 3 days like that this week. There's issues that need to be dialogued. There's things that need to happen. So the take-home message on recovery and monitoring your own recovery, this doesn't just apply if you're an athlete. You can use that scale with work. You can use that with any activity. Monitor it daily and look at the trends and use it to self-monitor yourself, because the other thing is most people also know where their issues are. If I ask you, why don't you feel recovered? I had a big fight with my wife last night, couldn't sleep. You know why. That's a one-off issue. Or I haven't been eating well. There's bigger issues. I haven't been doing this for a while. It's normal to wake up feeling a little bit tired once in a while. It's normal to feel a little tired when you're arriving at your training session, especially if it's your early morning session. It is not normal to feel tired or unrecovered after your warm-up. That is a clear indication, and that's why the 3 timings in the day are really important to look at that pattern. Trends of low to moderate recovery are signs of bigger issues. The big 4 problems outside of sport: relationships, work, school, and money. These things often affect people, athletes or people in a fitness school, just general people going to work, worse than the physical training. The physical training is designed to get through it. We also got to be careful about going into an area that maybe we're not. I notice a lot of people online now are really getting into the mental coach game, and I get that. I think it's a normal extension of some of our career, but some of these issues are professionally professional issues, and you need to allow this to professionals. What we can do in the sort of strength conditioning in the fitness field is when we identify them, we can talk to the people about them, ask them about their support network, and if they don't have that, then go outside and try and find, connections with help that might be a little more certified and better than your own expertise. But the important thing is when you see issues, adjust your training, get into the dialogue, because as I said, by the time you're seeing physical issues with the athlete over long term, you're probably seeing a problem that's been there for a long time. So an exciting thing that happened when I started using the RPR, and I didn't expect it, is that when I was using with people, clients, for me, it was mostly high performance athletes, national or Olympic level, people involved in very intense training programs. But also from the private sector and the average person is, once you start monitoring your recovery, you start becoming aware of it. And you start becoming more aware of, wow, I need to do something different here. And as you know, unless you get something that kind of slaps you in the face to look at over time, you don't respond to it. So when you see this pattern, it could be even, test this out with work. Go a month, test yourself out. And then look back on your month and think, wow, I need to think about things differently. I'm waking up every day not ready for my day. I need to make change. And what it did was the athletes themselves that I worked with, the people that I worked with, they started trying to self-analyze and self-fix. And they wanted to make changes because they didn't like coming in every day with a low score. And it was immediately apparent. And then they would say, yeah, you know what, last 3 days, I've got to go to bed early. I've got to do this. I know what I need to do. Most people with an issue like this actually know what to do. Sometimes it's just finding a simple tool that helps us look at that metric and be able to apply it in a meaningful way. Give that a try. As always, this I think can raise a lot of questions. Please ask them, share, subscribe, like, and all that stuff. And let's keep moving forward. Now go get recovered.